Hey, what's up everyone, Danny here. In this video, I want to show you this gaming computer that I built at around the $750 price point. I'm pretty excited about this one because I was finally able to get my hands on a Zen 2 Ryzen 3 processor after they were basically out of stock everywhere for the longest time. It was either that or they were marked up super ridiculously. Like, they were going for as much as Ryzen 5 3600s were, which at that point isn't worth it. I've been seeing them coming back in stock in multiple places recently, and I was able to buy one for myself, and you should be able to too as of watching this video. This build is also in collaboration with Micro Center, who helped provide the remaining components of the build, and I've worked with them a lot up to this point on the channel, and I will repeat this time and time again. If you have a store near you, definitely take advantage of shopping there because they are one of the best places to buy PC hardware in person, and they're second to none when it comes to the variety they carry in store and their low prices and bundle deals. If you're brand new to computers or you don't know where to start, you can check out their custom PC showcase on their website where fellow community members piece together and share entire builds, and you can use that either as a reference or inspiration as you put your own build list together. Micro Center is also running a monthly contest where you can submit a PC that you've built into the showcase for a chance to win a $500 Micro Center gift card. And I'll have links with more information to that in the description below, but for now, let's check out the rest of this build. So let's go over all the parts used in this build. Everything is available at Micro Center, and I'll have links down below in the description for everything used. But in case you don't have a Micro Center near you, I'll have links from other sellers as well. Starting off at the very heart of this build, we have the Ryzen 3 3100. This is one of the two newer Zen 2 Ryzen 3 CPUs. The other one is the 3300X. Like I said earlier, these were sold out for the longest time with third-party sellers price gouging them because of how popular they are. So I've held off on building with it until I could pick one up for the MSRP of $100, which is a fantastic price for what you're getting. You have 4 cores, 8 threads with a 3.6 GHz base clock and 3.9 GHz boost clock. The other CPU, the 3300X, comes in at $120, so it's only $20 more for a bump in performance. And if I had the choice, I would have used that one in this build, but unfortunately those are still sold out everywhere because they're the more popular of the two. The 3300X doesn't just benefit from higher clock speeds out of the box, it also benefits from the way the cores are physically grouped together on the processor, which results in lower latency when they're communicating with each other. But with that said, the 3100 at $100 is still an awesome buy if you don't have access to the 3300X. Both of them work very well for their given price points. I'm using a stock Ray Stealth cooler in this build. I've been a huge fan of these since AMD redesigned their stock coolers when the first gen Ryzen released, and these have always been reliable. They're not an eyesore like their old coolers were, or like stock Intel ones. The noise levels and cooling is good enough to usually allow for a small overclock, and most importantly, it doesn't cost anything extra. The motherboard I'm using is the ASRock B450 Pro 4, which comes in at $90. This is compatible with Ryzen 3000 processors out of the box without the need for BIOS updates, and I like this board because it's one of the more affordable ones that actually has heat sinks on the VRMs and can overclock well for its price. For the time being, I'm still okay with using B450 boards for Ryzen builds, even though B550 is out now, because those are a little bit pricier. I also don't personally value PCIe Gen 4 enough to pay a premium for it. If it's included in whatever I'm buying already, or what I'm intending to buy, then I'll gladly take it for free, but I'm not going to go out of my way to get it right now. The graphics card in this build is the MSI Ventus GTX 1660 Super, which comes in at $240. This mid-range card will cover all of your high frame rate 1080p gaming needs, and will also be able to handle 1440p for the lighter titles. There isn't really a direct competitor for the 1660 Super from the current lineup of AMD cards, since the 5500 XT is like an entire performance bracket below it, and it comes in at a price tag of $200, and the 5600 XT is a performance bracket above it, coming in at $300. So if you got around the mid $200 to spend on a new graphics card, then this is going to be the card for you. There's not much else. If you're interested in streaming though, this card being Team Green will be beneficial because it's able to leverage NVIDIA's NVENC encoder, and that's going to relieve stress off the CPU, and I'll show you some benchmarks from that at the end of the video. For RAM, I went with 16GB of 3200 MHz Team Group Delta RGBs at $75. I chose these specifically for the white color scheme and RGB. That's pretty much the main reason I did that. If you're not going for a certain color scheme and can forgo on the fancy lighting, then you can probably save yourself around $10 to $15 for similar kits at the same rated speeds. They'll just be a little bit more plain looking. I still always try to use RAM that is 3000 megahertz or higher if I'm doing a Ryzen build, which is pretty much like all the builds I've been doing for a while now. Haven't touched Intel for a while. But that's because Ryzen does benefit from higher RAM speeds. And 3000 isn't really hard to achieve at a really good price because RAM is priced very well at the moment, and it has been for a while. So yeah, there's no reason to go anything below 3000 megahertz. For storage, I started the build off with the 500GB Crucial P2, which is enough to get started as a boot drive, and it's going to be able to hold a handful of games so long as it's not multiple copies of Call of Duty Modern Warfare. This is very much an entry-level NVMe drive, and it isn't meant to be a competitor to higher-end drives. Rather, it's just like the next step up from SATA SSDs in providing a more convenient form factor, less cables to manage, and faster read and write speeds at a still competitive price. For the power supply, I chose the Corsair CX650M. Power supplies are still very overpriced at the moment, and this one comes in at $100. This is pretty much the norm now if you want a good vetted power supply that has been tested rigorously by multiple professional reviewers that actually have the necessary equipment to test it. There are options at the same wattage output in the $60 to $70 price range, but they're typically lower end or they have like no reviews on them at all. So it's really up to you on whether or not you want to spend more money on a power supply. This is the one area that it doesn't hurt to spend a little bit more on. The power supply is the one component in your system that can be reused the longest as you upgrade your build with the newest, latest, and greatest parts. You know, eventually everything else is going to go, even like hard drives and stuff I thought would last longer, but SSD prices have come down so much that I've even replaced SSDs quicker than I thought I would. But the power supply is the one thing that can last you through multiple build cycles. So yeah, don't be too afraid to spend a little bit more on it, which we kind of have to anyways given the current climate of their prices. The case I'm using for this build is the NZXT H510. I've used the black version of this case in a recent build and I really enjoyed building in it, so I decided to use it again, except this time in the white variant, since I've only ever done one other build in a white case on the channel, and that was a really long time ago. I'm long overdue for another one. I think the H510 is priced really well at the $70 price point, given its features such as the tempered glass side panel, the super simple single screw mounting design for that tempered glass side panel, a power supply basement, two included 120mm fans, good cable routing built in, and just an overall clean and modern aesthetic. The biggest critique that NZXT cases typically get is in the airflow department, since it's got a solid front. All their cases have solid fronts. So you know, there's no mesh and there's limited intake openings to bring in fresh, cool air. But for most builders out there, this case will work just fine, and I think it delivers a lot in almost every other category aside from the airflow to still be considered really good value. You're going to see later in the benchmarks that the temperatures are fine and there's no throttling or anything like that. But now that we've gone through all the parts, let's take a look at the price summary. As always, there are ways to modify this build if your budget is slightly higher or lower. If you're looking to save a bit of money, you can just as easily go with a cheaper case and less fancy RAM, and that won't have any major impacts on the performance from what you'll see later on in the benchmarks. You can also try to find a better deal on a power supply. $100 is a bit on the high end, and it's possible to snag a decent deal for around $70 if you wait a little bit, and doing these things can easily bring the build down closer to around $700. I'll be releasing a separate build video showing the entire build sequence. A lot of you seem to really enjoy the silent build videos, and I really enjoy making them, so definitely keep an eye out for that in the near future. But here it is, the glamour B-roll of the build. Now it's time to look at the performance. For overclocking, I had the Ryzen 3100 running at 4.1 GHz on all cores. The RAM is set to the 3200 MHz XMP profile, and the 1660 Super is running at an additional 200 MHz on the core and an additional 1 GHz on the memory. All titles were tested at both 1080 and 1440p. So yeah, without further ado, here are the benchmarks. So this build does really well in 1080p, and it's not too shabby in 1440p given the overall price. You can tweak the graphics settings for improved frame rates if you want. I had most of the titles set to the max settings because I felt like the build could handle those settings, and the results were perfectly acceptable for me. Yeah, they didn't reach like the average 144 FPS in all the titles, but the frame rate was, you know, it was high enough to provide a still good gaming experience. In addition to the benchmarks that you just saw, I also tested a couple of the titles in streaming for those of you who may be interested in doing that. I used OBS with the NVENC encoder and simple output mode, streaming at 1080p and 60 FPS. I tested the two harder titles to run in my gaming library, Call of Duty Warzone and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, since they're pretty demanding on both the CPU and GPU. In Call of Duty Warzone, we do see an average frame drop of roughly 10% as a result of streaming even with the NVENC encoder. And note that the two runs aren't completely identical due to the nature of not having a built-in benchmark for this game. So there is some variance there with, you know, how many people are on the map at a given time and what path was taken, which is why I also ran Assassin's Creed Odyssey with and without streaming. The benchmarking tool allows for a direct comparison without influence of external variables or like different NPCs or scenes being in the way. And doing that, there was roughly a 10% decrease in both the average and minimum FPS. So that lines up pretty well from what we see in Call of Duty. But on that note, that's going to wrap it up for this video. I hope you all enjoyed and found this either useful or entertaining. Let me know your overall thoughts on the build down in the comments below. Now, with regards to power supplies and how expensive they are at the moment, I'm really curious to hear from you all. How willing are you, or how willing would you be to stray away from the higher tier units and use like a lower tier or lesser known brand to save some money? To be honest, like I've used pretty sketchy power supplies in the past in my own personal systems, and I've never had a major problem. Like I've never had it blow up or take out an entire build, even though you hear about that anytime you bring up like low-end power supplies on the internet. But as someone who can troubleshoot my own PCs and I have extra parts on hand to swap in just in case, I'd be more okay using it for myself for a build. But for a build guide like this, it's harder to recommend, especially to newer builders, since they won't have the ability to troubleshoot with like extra parts or like an extra PC, like if they are relying on their PC and it goes down. I know Micro Center has their in-house brand called like PowerSpec, and I've been keeping my eye out on them for a while. And I'm pretty interested in using one in like probably a future build because they are considerably cheaper. And if you get a high enough rated unit and you're not running it at max capacity, I think they could be viable, but I definitely want to do more research before I go and be comfortable recommending them. But those are just some of the thoughts that I had as of like wrapping up this build, and I'm really curious what you all think about that. But yeah, I want to thank you all as always for watching and supporting the channel. Take it easy, and I will see you down in the comments as well as in the next video. Bye.